Om Shatagunam Vidyan Mananam Mananadapi Nidijasam Lakshagunam Anantam Nirvikalpakam Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Hearing about Brahman is good. Taking teachings on Brahman is better. Meditating directly upon Brahman is better still. And best of all is that meditation in which all doubt about the nature of reality dies away forever. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Very good to see all of us gathered together today on Saturday, Sat Day. Sat means existence, part of that threefold name given to Brahman, which is divine reality, called Satchitananda or Satchidananda. And it also prepares us for Satsang. As another week has rolled by and we find Saturday has arrived, reminds me always when I hear that word of Shankara's famous verse from the Bhajagovindam hymn, where he sings Satsangatve Nisangatvam, Nisangatve Nirmohatvam, Nirmohatve Nishchalitatvam, Nishchalitatve jivanmukta, in which he says, starts off with that word satsang, from company of the holy, brings non-attachment. Non-attachment brings freedom from delusion, moha, nirmohatvam. And freedom from delusion brings steadiness of mind, nishchalitatvam. And then steadiness of mind nets you jivanmukta, which is a great word that my guru used in almost every talk that he gave. He was very much into seeing beings in this world, and particularly in the West where he was working, develop a few jivanmuktas, living liberated souls. The jiva is that being that has been covered by the five sheaths, as we know in Vedanta, that's taken on these five coverings of body, energy, mind, thought, and ego. That's Vedanta puts it. So if we can strip these coverings off the gift and see through that, and see the Atman existing in all things, particularly in ourself first, that's the great self, as even Lord Buddha talked about, in contrast to the small self, the ahamkara, or the ego self. And if that can be done, then one can live a life of freedom. Jiva, the embodied being, gaining mukta, or mukti, liberation. And that's, of course, a liberation that's always at hand, not something that's been given in the future to be looked forward to necessarily, but something that's right here and now in the eternal moment. So that jivanmukta is what Shankara sang about back in his time, which is around 700 AD. So he wrote this beautiful hymn about that. Satsangatve nisangatvam, nisangatve nirmohatvam, nirmohatve nishchalitatvam, nishchalitatve jivanmukta. So hopefully all of us are in knowledge of this Brahman that I just talked about, because I also chanted from his Vivekachidamani when I said Shatagunam Vidyan Mananam Mananadapshi. So first Mananam, we have to, well, first Shruti, or to hear it, and then Mananam, we have to roll it over and over again in our minds. That's a process that is a refining of the wisdom we've heard. And then finally, nidijasam, he says, then you meditate upon that Brahman alone. Place your thoughts on reality alone. For most of us, we're doing that, or trying to do that, attempting to do that in our daily meditation, possibly in the morning when you get up. Or maybe you'll do 2 meditations, have 2 sessions, one in the evening too. So that's, whether people know it or not, a kind of attempt to put everything on hold and just place the thoughts on divine reality alone, which we call Brahman, but other traditions have names for that too, like Allah or Pragyaparam, Buddha called it the supreme intelligence. So whatever, and by whichever name you call it, putting your mind upon that and that alone, at least for a small time, small period during the day, is very purifying for mind, senses, ego. And it tends to thin those veils and those coverings that wrap the Atman, so one can have direct communion with the self. And that's what we talk about when we meet for satsang. And I hope some of you have come ready to share some thoughts that you have had from the study of the scriptures. That's Swadhyaya, according to the father of yoga. Read those scriptures, then you have to do that mananam. Mananam means to roll it over and over in the mind. And that's just not to necessarily pass the time in thoughts of Brahman, but there are deep meanings in all these words, particularly in the Sanskrit, that many of us have taken to memorizing in Swadhyaya fashion, because then, as if you would unwrap power from an atomic particle, then you can unwrap great inner power from placing your mind upon these words, these letters, and mantras they're called in Sanskrit. There's great power in words, and greater power in words that you associate with the Lord and Divine Mother of the universe, or with that absolute aspect of Brahman, because in our tradition, we focus most on form and formlessness, not one or the other. And so in that time of meditation, you learn how to take name and form and time and space and causality, called namarupa desha kala nimitta, and turn that all into an expression of Brahman, instead of seeing it as something that's only a covering power. But you have to notice it and then penetrate through it and see things as they really are. That is that one light of consciousness that stands as the underlying substratum. Meister Eckhart called it the underlying substratum of behind everything, behind the appearances of things. So you can see that one light shining in all. So maybe this is calling up some questions in you, or some thoughts that you've had yourself in your studies of the Shruti, that one thing they say which should be heard first and foremost among all things that you hear in a whole lifetime. Is that Shruti, that strand of truth, that divine mother wisdom that's tying together everything. Not just our sentences, but our daily experiences and our whole lifetime of phenomena that passes in front of us, all tied together by this Shruti, by this sutra, by these slokas, by these divine words. So come forth with some divine words for me.
Namaste, Babaji.
Yes, Abhinaya.
Pranam. I was reading in the Gospel about Sri Ramakrishna talking about Brahman and Shakti being indivisible, like the fire and its heat. And how should we understand this teaching in the light of, like, if we want to meditate on the immutable Brahman, that should we think of these two principles as being inseparable? Or can we meditate on one of them at a time? Like if we want to meditate on Brahman, or we want to meditate on Shakti, is that possible, or are they actually inseparable? I don't know if this is a good question to ask.
It's a very good question. It's rather an eternal question, but I think we need to turn it more into a statement of fact, is that God is with form, God is beyond form, and God is beyond both form and formlessness as well, was the final conclusion of the great master, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. And so we just talked about form and formlessness. And so generally speaking, at least you could say that Parama Shiva, if you're talking about Shiva and Shakti, is more you're coming from the tantric angle instead of the Vedic angle. If you talk about Shiva and Shakti, then you're talking about Parama Shiva being the ultimate reality beyond form, and Shakti being that Mahashakti or Mahamaya that animates all things. So Sri Ramakrishna used to put it very simply. He said, and this will probably be a good God blog to do if it hasn't been done already, just came to mind that he used to say, a man walks down the street and he's on one side, he's got his wife, and on the other side, he has his daughter. He loves them both intensely, but both in different ways. He shows his love to them, affection to them in different ways. So he's not just talking about a nice family scene in the village or something. He's talking about Shiva and Shakti. So basically, he's got, on one side of him, he has the divine reality, and which is formless and all pervasive and all penetrating, all bliss. It doesn't fall victim to all of the things that are called phenomena that rise and fall in the realms of name and form. And on the other side, he has divine reality with form, his Ishtam or Ishvara, or his Guru, or the saints and seers and rishis, the Gyanis. So he's enriched by both of these on both sides. So the mind, of course, has a terrible time trying to hold everything, hold more than one thing at once. It's very difficult to do that. Maybe impossible, they say, to do it actually. But in a general sense, it can be done, that you can hold two ideals like form and formlessness. And that practice expands the mind so that eventually it can become one-pointed and then it become universal. So basically, the route that most people take is that their mind is scattered. In the case of others, it's dull. So that's called muda and kshipta by the father of yoga. Those are two unhealthy states of mind, which are actually rather natural to most people these days. A dull mind and scattered mind, or you could say distracted mind too. That's vikshipta. So between these three modes, the mind is running back and forth, and very seldom, if ever, getting any balance or peace. What to speak of transcendence, because there's another state of mind called ekagra, which is one-pointedness, and then the fifth state of mind called niruddha, which is actually no mind, which we come to call no mind or pure mind. No vibrations. It's nivritti, it doesn't vibrate. So those are the five states of mind. The first three are never conducive to enlightenment, But those last two are what are sought after. One-pointed mind and I say that on purpose, and or, not just one or the other. And that one-pointed mind then, if you call it peace of mind, if it's deep enough, then leads to that transcendence of all things in nature. That's called koivalya by Patanjali. You isolate yourself from nature. So, and that way, then you see the man walking down the street has both these ideals on both sides of him, nicely called his wife and his daughter. He loves them both, but he loves them in different ways. So loves them in different ways means that in Brahman, it's a rather impersonal kind of love. It's a universal kind of love. It's gone from the specific to the general to the universal. And so most people call their mind back from the world. That's what actually we just said, Satsangatve Nisangatvam, Nisangatve Nirmohatvam. So that Nisangatvam means to detach from things, to become non-attached. And so if most people make that attempt, maybe called pratyahara in yoga, and then when they do, then they become into a more centered mind, and they try and hold that. We know that as transcending the guna of rajas, or restlessness, and arriving at a state of balance called sattva. And the longer we can hold sattva, which is actually a penultimate goal, but it's also very difficult to do, to remain balanced all the time in the press of all the changes that are going on all around you and in you, that is outside of you, which is nature and living beings and so forth, the phenomena. And then inside your own thoughts, to calm them and keep them calm all the time is a great penultimate goal in the practice that leads towards enlightenment or illumination. So when a person is in the stage of spiritual awakening, this is one of the great practices to attain to implement and to attain to. So in that, you have a great aid in that you're withdrawing the mind from things, and you're placing them on one of two choices then: God with form, God without form. Or you could say God with form. Your mind is easily taking up communion with the Ishtam. You keep the Ishtam with you all the time, and your chosen ideal goes around with you all the time. And could be Christ, could be Buddha, could be Krishna or Ramakrishna. In the different religions, everyone has their ideal that they feel is like their own soul or their own self. And they carry that around with them and think about them with an inner smile all the time, even if you have to sometimes hide it from the outer world, which doesn't understand. But on the other hand, then every once in a while you have this amazing experience of transcendence, samadhi, that comes, which takes you up and beyond the ordinary and posits the mind not just at the feet of the Lord, but brings it up to the heart and third eye and crown of the head, part of the Lord. You could look at the chakras of Kundalini Yoga and say that they kind of represent basically the different bodies of the Lord, different forms of the Lord, which are specifically inward and transcendent of everything in nature. So that would be a way then of having some sort of commerce every once in a while with the transcendental reality, or Brahman, with the Swarupa, the essence of everything, in which great souls like Vivekananda have told us that he saw everything in the world just fall away, houses, buildings, people, and he had this experience come upon him in his teen years, that everything just fell away. And He was taken up and above it all, as it were. It means inside and beyond it all. And it's a very stunning experience to have. Sometimes they'll even call it jada, means to be stunned. Jada samadhi. This is probably what Christ was having sitting under the tree in the wilderness, and what Buddha was having under the bo tree was this jada samadhi at first, where they took their mind off of phenomena long enough. Again, nisangatvam, no sangha with anything, not having any attachment to anything. So it's rather interesting to say that, you have to have commerce with things first, and then you get detach yourself from that ordinary run of life after a while to get this special concourse or communion with the divine. That's have satsang, and then that frees you from delusion, nirmohatvam. So you have then two great ideals or two great friends. One's all pervasive, all around you, all the time and within you, and the other is taking a form and acting as a gateway into that formless state. And both of these go together in one experience. So, and then pretty soon a person is like Sri Ramakrishna coming in and out of this highest samadhi through these open channels or nadis that the yogis use. They run their attention, their concentration along those open nadis. This gets back to words that can express this, and that come from our thoughts, that our thoughts have opened up channels and turned into words and into objects too. And then we take our attention as divine Shakti is flowing from inside to out. Purnamadaha, Purnamidam. It's all full, and so the Maya gets struck away from the quotient. The delusion goes away, nirmohatvam, and then you have just this one experience in two forms. Sometimes you're in an indran state. They call that Shiva yoga. Eyes fully closed. And sometimes you're in a state that sees both inwards and outwards. That's called Vishnu yoga. Eyes half open, half closed. And so that's how spiritual maturation takes place. And it leads eventually to this very developed state of samadhi. But the samadhi has seated varieties, and then it has occasionally an unseated variety. Nirbijam, it doesn't show itself anymore. It doesn't fructify. Your thoughts don't have to come down and fructify into words and objects. They can remain inside of yourself, and you can just ponder them there and extract great bliss from them. And that's precisely why they're so blissful without any objects around them, without any possessions, and without any bank accounts and various things that people occupy themselves with, is because their thoughts have been stripped free of all of that weight, and they can just manana, they can just roll them around in their mind all the time. And that's how they extract bliss from these matras of sound or wisdom, mother wisdom. So a little explication of that, basically in short form, is that the answer is just yes 2 times. Yes to form, yes to formlessness. And that's the best kind of a combination that you can call together for yourself here in this realm called Earth or Burloka. everywhere I go, I see only Ram. I look outside, I see only Ram. I look within, I see only Ram, as one great song in India says. So that's the loving devotion of a devotee that also occasionally, as Hanuman said about Ram, sometimes I feel like I'm just one with him. Sometimes I dance with him and we sing. Other times we meditate together. Other times I feel like I've merged into him. So there were three modes there in which reality was approached and apprehended by a great devotee like him. And it evinces very nicely and explains these modes that we have ourselves. When we're in a deep spiritual state, we have to be willing to put ourselves there. That's all. And if it comes down to having to drag yourself away from objects and all that, practice non-attachment because you become attached, and that's rather unfortunate, but it has to be done if you want that exceptional experience of salvikalpa and nirvikalpa, God with form, God without form.
I'll jump in. So this has been stated or implied many, many times in your classes, and of course in the teachings generally, but I was wondering if you would break it down for us. And that is how, and I think this happens at individual and collective, that desire impels the creation of the organs, the indriyas, organs of perception and action, as well as the elements and all of that. What is the part that desire plays? I mean, because the way I've heard it is we wanted to have bodies, and so we had to create all these things prior to. Anyway, if you could break that down and what the other associated aspects, teachings are with that. Thank you.
Well, coming out of just speaking about two different kinds of samadhis and down to the nuts and bolts and dynamics of yogic practice, and samkhya is probably what you're asking. So I'd say that in terms of vasana samskaras would probably be the way to approach it, in Shankar's way of saying it. There are these desires, vasanas, that turn into impressions and in the mind, and it's not all that different in the individual mind than it is in the collective mind. It's just vaster in the collective mind. The desire for things or for worlds starts at a very high level, cosmic level, and in the Mahat, if you look again towards Samkhya philosophy, the great mind of God, that's pretty much equated to the Trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So they have a major sankalpa, a very sattvic and balanced sankalpa going on. And they're the first ones to manifest name and form out of the great words like Om and Shrim and so forth. They receive that from the Shakti, and that Shakti power is contained in the great words. And then they will meditate on these great words. These great words will hum within them. And with their great minds, they'll begin to manifest or express the different levels of existence in which many beings will then infill with bodies, names, and forms, and so forth. And this happens at a primordial level or very early on in the cosmic mind, and then it trickles down out into the collective mind. Finally, you find it also manifesting here on earth in the individual mind, of which we have some 7 billion or more of them here on Earth. So this is all done out of a great desire for name and form and time and space. So that impetus then is desire, and it'll, as Holy Mother has said, cause these worlds to keep going on, these evolution process going on, and these cycles of time moving all the time. And of course, it's then got to reach through elements like the subtle senses and then the gross senses, you're calling the indriyas. So when that desire needs to express itself, and of course, when we say desire, we don't just mean base desire, gross desire, of which we see here on Earth a lot, and inadvertent and inordinate attachment to things that are empty and that kind of thing. We're talking more about samsara and about Maya when you speak in that way. But when you're talking about it as a divine cosmic thing, then this desire is more equated with what they call lila, or playfulness, or sportive play in the Lord. And therefore you'll see all these beings are sort of emanating that. You see, they're all coming here to sport, and they want to have their own lives and their own families and their own objects, their own little worlds. And that sportive play is going on. And then there's always a great soul, as Patanjali says, that's the Ishvara soul in the midst of all of this, which is doing the grand sporting, like the sport of all the avatars when they come to Earth in different periods of time. And that's going on with the more pure desire of expressing the divine, rather than the impure desire of just trying to own things or dominate over things, which you see later as the occult powers, the Astabalasiddhas that beings are wielding on, like, planet Earth, and falling away far, far from that vision of pure desire and falling into this realm of impure desire. So that's what Holy Mother makes a division between those desires that increase your non-attachment, as we were just singing about, nisangatvam, and those desires which contribute to more attachment. So if the devotee is in possession of desire and it becomes a heavy burden to them, then they should think about transforming those thoughts into desire for worship of the Lord, desire for knowledge from the scriptures, and desire for meditation on formlessness, and desire for serving God and all beings. Basically, then that desire reaches its intended purpose, even at such a solidly vibrating level of consciousness that we find here in the Burloka, or on the earth plane. Again, it's quite a matter of words. You can take any word and it can be a very good word. It could have a lot of negative overtones at the same time, and vice versa. Desire can be a very looked upon by the person who's caught in it, and also by the person who's fearful of it, like a practitioner, and it can be a very negative thing. But there again, you take that tantric view and you deify it. You take all the poison out of it. It's like Sri Ramakrishna said, having a snake that you took the fangs and poison out of, and then you can just play with it, and it doesn't bite or inject poison into you anymore. You can impress your friends with it. So in that way, this poison of base attachment and so forth has to be taken out of the quotient. And then, again, like we were talking about, the jivanmukta, the living liberated soul, can move through the earth plane and can inhabit the body and see nothing but God and hear nothing but God and express nothing but God. Of course, the more people that learn that art, the better, so that we're not just left with a few great exemplars like Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda and the direct disciples in our tradition, but that we have a whole host of beings that we can then commune with who are in knowledge of this highest reality. When we were with our founder, Lex Hickson, at SRV, we always felt like that in his company, that he was going around naturally attracting people of a high-souled, high-minded nature. And everything that was not of that variety was naturally filtered out. And we had this natural openness to souls who would gather in groups. So that's really the Satsangatve that you want on the world. You want to have that holy company with the entire world and the whole, everyone on the same page, as the expression goes. And that's what it feels like in the company of these great souls and their devotees or apostles or direct disciples. And that's that love you hear sung about and spoken about in groups like that. Oh, the selfishness is gone and the selflessness has come through. And that's a mart of joy, as Sri Ramakrishna describes it. Life is no longer a prison house of suffering, but it's a mart of joy, he said. Yes, Anahata has something to say. Please.
Namaste, Babaji. We live in a world where there is so much fear, and fear is often the root cause of many of the problems. And it can exist kind of subtly within us. And I know that in your recent seminar on renunciation, you did speak somewhat about the relationship between the practice of renunciation and fear. And I just wondered, can you say a little bit more about how the path of renunciation can lead us out of fear, even the subtle fears that might exist within us?
Well, it's the opinion of some very illumined souls that renunciation is the only thing that can lead you away from fear. Everything else is fraught with fear. So the starlet fears disfiguration, the scholar fears someone more wise, the rich fear thieves. So there's verses in Bhartrihari Stotram which end, only renunciation is fearless. That's the last line of every one of these verses. So he's come to that realization and the knowledge that if he was just to leave everything alone just as it is, and not possess it, not be attracted to it, just be on absolutely even keel with everything. And he was able to maintain that state of mind, that equanimity of mind, that steady wisdom in the mind that only Brahman is real and the world is unreal. Then he could have this mature renunciation, and there would be nothing to fear in that. Even the fear of death, which is the final great fear, Krishna says in the Gita, even that will go away. So in the midst of this play, we were just talking about those beings who know it to be a play and who know themselves to be actors on that stage of the play. They're never thinking about death as being something that's an end to everything. because they're not attached to the things that they're moving amongst. So they can just move amongst the objects of the senses without any attachment. So they naturally don't have that fear of losing. It's been totally erased from them. They're in the moment, taken up in the moment 100%. And you see that in the case of the great souls when they hear embodied in form, when they've incarnated, that they have this transcendental state of mind sometimes, and at other times they have this bliss of seeing Brahman in everything, seeing God in everything. So they're actually obviously not seeing objects as being actual. They're seeing objects as being Brahman. They're even pleasure becomes more exquisite than just everyday pleasure, and they have taken that element out of it, which is adheses inside and drags the soul down from this high state of mind that it naturally wants to be in. Like Sri Ramakrishna called that buoyancy of mind. Make your mind like a hot air balloon and cut off the sandbags. So all of this practice has been done by them, and then they've reached this state of natural buoyancy. And then they can say, only renunciation is fearless. Only renunciation is fearless. So in the meantime, it's a practice, as we looked at in that seminar you just mentioned. And the practice is called detachment, as we were just singing about in Shankara's hymn. And when that matures, then one has this natural state of universal mind. It's an open-handed policy, Vivekananda talked about it, where they're not holding on to anything, but they're seeing everything as an expression of divine reality. And so then even death becomes just an energy that transfers the soul from one state of consciousness to another, and not, as we look at it here, in a rather morbid way, something that ends our life of pleasure and our life of attachments to things and relations. It just transitions you into the next and higher level of consciousness. And so you salute it. And there's that beautiful song in India that says, I've received a command from the mother of the universe that death must die. So the idea of death dies, and you make fear afraid of itself, and put death in its own grave, as my teacher used to say, so that you can get on with the expression of the free expression of Brahman in everything, without anything coming along and spoiling that play. Of course, there'll always be some pathos in a play, and some tragedy in a play, and some things that build character, as Holy Mother used to say. And those are those things that you want to cut your teeth on as a spiritually awakening soul, so that pretty soon you can be, as Sri Krishna says in the Gita, content with anything. Arjuna, be content with anything. And he's telling Arjuna this, of course, in the midst of a battle, where two sides of an army are coming together in this horrific war that's going on in Kurukshetra. So you must be content even with that in the midst of it. So that kind of equanimity settles in when renunciation matures. That's the main teaching that comes out of the Gita, is renunciation. Some people say it's love, some people say it's wisdom, others say it's karma, yoga. But the main teaching out of the Gita is tyagi, renunciation of all things. Only that's fearless, and only that will leave one in a state of yoga. That's yogic equipoise, eternal balance, which is the state of Brahman itself. in the meantime, then for us, that becomes again a practice that strengthens us and builds our character. Beautiful song in India again that says, Abai pari prana shopechi, kalinam kalpataru, hridaye ropana shopechi. Basically it means, Abai, I must become fearless. Bhaya is fear, so abhaya is fearlessness. So I became fearless, and then the Divine Mother appeared in my heart as the Kalpataru. Kalinam, her name. Kalpataru, Hridaye, in my heart. Hridaya. So I planted the seed of Mother Kali, her name, in my heart, and it became a wish-fulfilling tree. And now death cannot frighten me any longer. So there are beings in the past then who have realized this great truth of fearlessness and taken refuge in the eternal Mother, and therefore have escaped the cycles of birth, life, death, and rebirth in ignorance. And if they're found or seen in a cycle at all, at any time, they're always seen manifesting this divine sport. They're always on and on about something grand and noble, and the rest can fall away as of no consequence, i.e. Jagad Mitya, the world's false, only Brahman is real. Who has another question, probably even from another direction, as we're going up and down the ladder of Dharma and truth? Yes, Jyoti.
Namaste, Babaji. Namaste, everyone. Just a quick question in regards to mentioning the two types of meditation earlier, one with kind of eyes fully closed and one with eyes slightly open. In regards to japa or mantra practice, can that kind of go either way depending on the mood you're in, or is it recommended to align japa mantra practice with one of those two ways of meditation? Thank you.
Well, if you're talking about the actual physical eyes, then that's, in meditation, sort of a matter of little moments. You could actually, they said you could actually touch Sri Ramakrishna's eye with a finger and he wouldn't blink. He was so out of his senses when he was in samadhi. He was so beyond the senses. So he would not be operating his five senses, and the consciousness had withdrawn from them. So it wouldn't really matter, of course, to a soul like that if when in meditation, whether their eyes were open and their eyes were closed. So the physical eyes, yeah, not so much important. It's just a way of saying or an expression to use. But when you're meditating and using the mantra and the practice of japam, of course, is a practice. It's one of one of the greatest practices of all, but it's still very much around God with form. And it's got to lead to some ultimate goal. It's not, japa itself is not a goal. So you might say for the bhakta, when the name bubbles up from the heart, the name of the Lord bubbles up spontaneously from the heart, like a bubbling spring of ambrosia, then that might be a sort of goal of the name has reached its maturation and is pouring forth bliss. And it would be that bliss that the Jnani or the non-dualist is feeling when they contemplate on God beyond form. That is when the beads, as they're telling on their hand, in Sri Ramakrishna's case, just sort of fell from his hand, and he was again in a kind of stunned state that the names of the Lord had already taken him to the Lord. And the Lord there is not a Lord with form or in a physical world. It's in a transcendental state, indivisible state. And so they're the two act together. So when Sri Ramakrishna was in that indrawn state, then the eyes would be possibly fully closed. And again, I'm not speaking just the physical eyes, the whole subtle eyes too, because you have 5 subtle senses inside of you in those deeper realms. So everything would be turned off. You're not really interested in seeing anything. You're more involved in being everything. You're not interested in seeing anything. You're more involved in being everything. So you're not looking for a vision of the light. You are that thou art. So when you talk on that level, you're beyond the 5 gross senses and the 5 subtle senses and the 5 gross elements and the 5 tanmatras, the subtle elements. And that's why we study those 20 cosmic principles, because when consciousness lifts off of them, like a hot air balloon lifts off the earth when its weights are cut, then it has knowledge of a supreme destination, or a paragatam, as Buddha called it, a supreme goal, which it's headed for, but it uses these principles as stepping stones inward. I used to call them breadcrumbs that you would follow back to your home. You left a trail of those, cosmically speaking. So that's the greater inference there than Jyoti, that, when you say, because Holy Mother used to say, does God only exist when eyes are closed and cease to exist when you open them? So she was also talking about not just the physical eye, but the whole perception of the great cosmic principle of sight and the great cosmic principle of sound. That's called your name, Jyoti. That's sight, that's light. And Shabda, Anahata's name, that's sound, you see. So those are the 2 great principles, sight and sound. But when they're taking inward and to their inmost goal and essence, then they abandon all the vehicles or these cosmic principles that they once inhabited or had some association with. They identified with them for a while, then they associated with them after that, then they dissociated with them. Nisangate, they had no attachment to them whatsoever. And then they like a hailstone falling in an ocean, then they just became that which they always were and always are. And that the process of that is called involution, and it has a goal to reach. As evolution has already reached its goal out here. Surprise, supplies. You see, everything out here has already happened. You've manifested it. Back to Annapurna's question, the desire for it has produced all of this out here. It's already yours, and this is the solid form of it. And guess what? You found out that it's not all that great after a while, and you want to evolve away from it. Nature is beautiful for a while. It's alluring, it's attracting, it's terrible. It's all so many things, but it's definitely empty of substance. It can't fulfill you, because the real fulfillment is inside of you, from where all nature came from. So it's back in the seeds of nature. When you find the seeds of nature in your thoughts, then you burn those thoughts over the fire of knowledge, and then they can't germinate anymore. And that's the process of that's called involution. It's not provided for in this world, in this day and age, by our intellectuals, you see, and by our scientists and so forth, particularly in the West. And quite a lot of the art of it is even being forgotten in the East. So to recall that, by the way, it's called Adi Daiva Vidya by the great ancient seers. It's the original Adi Daiva, divine, Vidya, wisdom. It's the original divine wisdom, is this knowledge of how consciousness produces things, gets on board and rides them out, all the way down to the most external expression of God, which is the five elements, and then gets back on that horse and rides it all the way back to the source again and lets the horse out to pasture. Kaivalya, called Father of Yoga. So that's the original divine knowledge. Even if you don't know it in Sanskrit, even if you don't know it as Samkhya, just to know that consciousness starts out, Sri Ramakrishna says, as Nitya, eternal, then expresses itself and turns into Leela, divine play, then gives up the play and comes back and rests again in the Nitya. That's my most mature conclusion, he said. So he didn't have to know any philosophy necessarily, didn't have to have any terms ready and available to speak about it with. You just had to know that that was the play of consciousness and that it also had a state beyond the play, which is its original source. So asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityur ma amritam gamaya, albeit. Just knowing that enough then frees you from the great fear. Nityam, om shanti shanti shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, and from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother of the universe, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us, peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.